The name Stonehenge is thought to come from the Old English or Saxon word Stanhengen, which means stone hanging, because it kind of resembles what gallows looked like in the Middle Ages. You had two uprights with a crossbeam.
Stonehenge has towered above the English countryside like a rock puzzle for ages. For reasons that have baffled generations, forgotten hands constructed a ring of towering stones.
Some of the stones at Stonehenge weigh between 50 and 70 tons. So how could you have moved these into place? How could you have moved them from Wales, where the blue stones, the spotted dolerite, came from within Stonehenge?
Was it a heavenly clock, a center of worship, or something much more enigmatic? Following years of excavation, scanning, and meticulous analysis, scientists now assert that they have found evidence that challenges everything we previously believed to be true.
Now, to a layperson, this might not mean too much, but to Lubbock, this tells him exactly who built Stonehenge. And it is not who anybody expected.
What they found inside the stones and beneath the earth reveals a story far more shocking than any folktale. As we discover what they discovered, step in. The Wandering Stone's secret in the New Wall Boulder. The tale of the Newell Boulder is Exhibit A if you've ever needed evidence that archaeology can depend on the smallest, most easily overlooked facts. Even though Stonehenge is a monument composed of giants, one of its longest-standing scientific mysteries was solved by a tiny stone that was hardly bigger than a football. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't lovely. Furthermore, it was not even seen as significant for nearly a century. However, it was silently awaiting the day when science would catch up with it, much like many other lost treasures. When it did, the outcomes were nothing short of spectacular. About a century ago, while archaeologists were still learning out how to methodically document what they were discovering at Stonehenge, the new boulder was discovered. Imagine excavations from the early 20th century. Wooden crates, notebooks, men in wool coats, and lots of well-informed speculation. This small, lumpy stone was lying among the tools, trenches, and scrawled designs. It was not as elegant as the big stars. It wasn't one of the striking blue stones in the inner circle. It was merely a rough, foliated piece with a slight sheen when exposed to the proper light. It didn't even look particularly noteworthy. They packaged it, cataloged it, and pretty much forgot about it. It silently accumulated dust and received no attention for decades while living among other stray pieces in museum storage. However, appearances can be deceiving. The minerals in this stone really told a tale. The Newell boulder was tiny but oddly complicated. It had a fibrous texture, was somewhat banded, and contained microscopic clues that would not be accessible until we developed the necessary instruments. And it made scientists re-examine a contentious issue when they eventually took a closer look. Did glaciers naturally take the blue stones from Wales to Stonehenge, or did people transport them there? Experts debated both viewpoints for years. Scratch-like marks were identified by some as indicators of glacial transit. Others contended that the stones were too purposefully positioned, worked, and formed for ice to account for. However, the argument simmered for decades in the absence of solid proof. Professor Richard Bevins then intervened. Arborist with University's Bevins and his group weren't looking for myths. You can't dispute the chemistry they were pursuing. In theory, their method was straightforward, but in reality, it was exquisitely harsh. Conduct a forensic analysis and treat every pebble as a suspect. They used geochemical fingerprinting to accomplish this. If you've ever heard someone claim that rocks are all the same, this technique disproves that claim. Trace chemical markers, which are microscopic marks hidden inside minerals that indicate a stone's precise origin, are present in every stone. Thorium and zirconium were the two key components in the new boulder. Based on the geological history of their source, these elements typically form predictable patterns. Consider them the DNA markers of the stone, distinct, particular, and almost impossible to imitate. One site lit up the charts when Bevan compared the chemical makeup of the boulders with granite outcrops throughout Wales. Craig Rosiffelin is a rocky, historic site in North Pemure. The levels of thorium were equal. The levels of zirconium were equal. The microscopic characteristics matched. It was not comparable. It wasn't even close. Geologically, it matched exactly. Importantly, there was no sign of glacial abrasion, no smoothing, no obvious scraping, and no rounding from rolling on ice. After a lengthy journey beneath a glacier, nature did not lightly dump this. This was intentional. Craig Rosy Feline is a harsh terrain straight out of fable. Cool rivulets cutting through old rock, thick forests, and sharp rocks. It appears to the inexperienced eye to be just another hillside in Wales. It is a treasure trove of hints for archaeologists. Clear evidence of Neolithic quarrying was found during excavations. Tools left behind, earthen platforms meticulously constructed to pull enormous stones downhill, hollows dug out of the ground where stones were retrieved, and wedge marks etched into the rock where ancient hands wrenched them free. This wasn't just a random rock patch. It was a fully operational prehistoric workshop where people created enormous structures out of raw stone. The quarrying operation was dated by researchers to approximately 3000 BCE, which is exactly in line with the early stages of Stonehenge's development. Furthermore, it wasn't limited to the new boulder. The new all boulder was found to be the same foliated rhyolite as previous bluestone fragments, including a buried piece known as Stone 32D, another fingerprint that pointed directly to Wales. However, this involved more than just matching rocks to quarries. The place had meaning. Craig Rosy Feline is located in an area with great cultural significance, ceremonial sites, old paths, and signs of structured communities that probably saw stone as identity rather than merely a material. In addition to supporting the human transit idea, the new data completely disproved the glacial theory. We would anticipate fragments strewn haphazardly throughout the Salisbury Plain, ice-smooth boulders, and a random, chaotic distribution if the blue stones have been carried by glaciers. However, none of this is true. Rather, the stones only show up at Stonehenge, giving the impression that they were purposefully collected and arranged. It's like assuming furniture just happened to show up in your living room if you think glaciers deposited the stones neatly where Neolithic builders needed them. Easy to use? Of course. Is it possible? Not at all. People had to move and arrange, even the SARS. Moving 3-ton blue stones from Wales wouldn't have been the most difficult aspect of the endeavor in comparison to those monsters. Difficult? Indeed. Not possible? No. Neolithic Britain is vividly depicted by the new wall boulder. Communities working together, networks spanning hundreds of miles, shared spiritual or cultural visions, and engineering prowess well ahead of its time are all things we frequently ignore. There was no chance. Nature wasn't helping out. It wasn't a pleasant mishap. It was a planned, intentional human endeavor. What might be said of the giants of Stonehenge, the towering SARS that form its famous silhouette, and the giants of the plain, tracing the SARS sunstones, if a little boulder showed such deliberate movement. If you have ever stood beneath Stonehenge's imposing stones, you are aware that they resemble old buildings rather than rocks. Impossibly heavy, silent, and immobile. However, the reality is much more bizarre. These enormous beings moved. SARS are the primary pillars of Stonehenge, the recognizable uprights and lintels that give the monument its distinctive silhouette. They are enormous chunks of silicified sandstone that have been solidified over millions of years into stones so durable that they may ignite against steel. The highest climb is more than 7 meters into the sky, and several weigh more than 20 tons. These are more than just big rocks. They are titans of geology, the type of stones that typically remain in their natural locations. However, when they saw these creatures, Neolithic engineers simply thought, yeah, we can work with that. One of the most important hints to Stonehenge's significance is their choice to construct with SARS. A culture is expressing power, permanence, and unity when it selects the largest, hardest material available. A shard of stone that shouldn't have existed helped solve the enigma of the Saracens' origins. During a 1958 refurbishment, a broomstick-sized core was surreptitiously removed from one of the pillars. The man who pocketed it, Robert Phillips, stored the polished tube for 60 years in his office and later at home. He didn't determine it was time to send it home until he was 90 years old. The case was solved by that seemingly harmless cylinder. With the returning core in hand, researchers were now able to do studies on the monument itself that would have been unimaginable, such as cutting, grinding, and dissolving small shards to disclose a complete geochemical fingerprint. This was paired by scientists using portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, a device that uses X-rays to detect the elemental composition of surfaces. The actual detective job then began. Teams from Devon to Oxfordshire, Wiltshire to Dorset, and other parts of southern Britain sampled Sarsun outcrops. After comparing, measuring, scanning, and cataloging dozens of locations, the fingerprints finally matched. Westwoods, a high, open ridge on the outskirts of what is now Marlborough, provided the 20-ton pillars of Stonehenge. These days, it's a serene woodland with dog walkers, mountain bikers, and bluebells. However, 5,000 years ago, it was a stony plain covered in enormous boulders that were waiting to be moved by a society with enough ambition. This location is directly responsible for 50 of the 52 stars. It's the closest that archaeology gets to a smoking gun. Even worse, the builders did not select the nearest stones. They selected the greatest, largest, straightest, and most consistent. Convenience was not the issue here. This had to do with vision. However, the Westwood tale is merely one piece of the puzzle. The altar stone is the one that doesn't follow the same rules. In contrast to the SARS, its chemistry indicates that it is located some 470 miles north, likely in Scotland. Imagine transporting a multi-ton slab without wheels through moorland, rivers, and mountains. However, people managed to do it. How? History provides hints, but we can only make educated estimates. Using basic yet clever tools, indigenous people around the world have moved massive stones. Water transportation along rivers or beaches, greased trackways, wooden rollers, thick ropes, and timber sledges. Neolithic Britain had all of these technologies. Even though the altar's journey was drawn out, lengthy, and extremely challenging, it was still feasible. It's easy to concentrate on the engineering, the ropes, the levers, and the sledges being pulled by chanting laborers wearing rawhide sandals when people mutter about Stonehenge. Even while the logistics are great, they fail to capture the underlying reality. It was customary to move these stones. Getting rock from point A to point B wasn't the only task. It involved uniting individuals, farmers, builders, clans, and even regions behind a common goal. Identity was created by the endeavor itself. The country was practically being pulled together by pulling on the same ropes. For this reason, the selection of distant stones is important. The majority of Neolithic structures were constructed using any nearby rocks. It wasn't Stonehenge. Its creators took great care to choose, gather, and put together stones from significant landscapes. Ancestral, spiritual, and political. It was not a strain to drag giants across Britain. It was a devotional act. And perhaps that's why Westwoods was picked. It was significant not only because of its magnitude and quality, but also because of the travel itself. Each mile was a thread in a narrative larger than any one locality. According to one researcher, the project wasn't just big. It was a large-scale, well-planned act. The generations-long memory of the good people. The type that molded identity. Here's the twist, though. Stonehenge's accuracy cannot be explained by weight and distance alone. It took more than just dropping the standing stones. They were arranged according to astronomical principles. What if the stones were meticulously measured in addition to being transported? Stonehenge's solar code functions as an endless calendar. People have stood in front of Stonehenge with the same bewildered look for thousands of years. Why in the world were these enormous stones out here? Burials, rituals, and ancient power move? Something even more audacious is suggested by recent studies. It's possible that Stonehenge was the first stone-built calendar in history. It was so massive and well-designed that it maintained accurate time long after its creators vanished. Surprisingly, fringe theorists aren't the source of this concept. It comes from reputable archaeologist Timothy Darville, whose research on antiquity recasts Stonehenge as a clever and unexpectedly graceful solar timepiece. This is how Darville makes his case. Stonehenge's architects did more than simply stack rocks to create striking structures. The sky was being encoded into stone. He claims that the monument accurately depicts the duration of the solar year, which is 365 and a quarter days. Furthermore, the arrangement and form of the stones are not the only important factors. They have it in their number. The 30 huge sarsen uprights of the sarsen circle were not selected at random, as Darble notes. They create a complete Neolithic month, a continuous cycle of 30 days. Two odd-shaped stones, S11 and S21, are gently divided each month into 3 tidy 10-day weeks, resembling antiquated exclamation points. After completing 12 of those cycles, you will have about 360 days, but not quite. The final 5 days appear in the middle of the enormous trilithon horseshoe. These 5 enormous stones weren't merely positioned for dramatic effect. They designated the epitominal days, bonus days reserved for festivals, rituals, or even to bolster the power of the elites who were familiar with the system. This is where the genius-level stuff comes in, though. To maintain the calendar in alignment with the real solar year, a day had to be added every 4 years. And Stonehenge had the station stones for that. A complete rectangle is formed by 4 stones. The builders were able to monitor when that additional day should be added because of their alignments. Prehistoric edition of leap year. A calendar that is this structured, this permanent, and this architectural. As we step back from the trenches, the laboratories, and the ancient quarries, one thing becomes clear. Stonehenge is not just a monument. It is a message. A message carved in stone by people who refuse to be forgotten. A message so vast, so precise, and so deliberate that even after 5,000 years, we can still feel its weight pressing against time itself. Every tiny clue, every pebble, every scratch mark, every buried fragment carries a whisper from a world that no longer exists. The Newell boulder, forgotten for nearly a century, proved that even the smallest artifact can rewrite history when science finally learns how to listen. The sarsen core, kept hidden for 60 years in a private drawer, exposed an ancient industrial network and a staggering vision stretching across England, Wales, and beyond. And the stones themselves, the giants of the plain, proved that Neolithic Britain wasn't a land of scattered tribes, but a vast connected society capable of engineering feats we still struggle to comprehend. But Stonehenge is more than an engineering marvel. It is a map of the sky, a solar machine, an ancient computer built of stone, tracking seasons, solstices, and the rhythm of a year with mathematical precision. With every sunrise, every shadow, and every shifting beam of light, the monument quietly performs calculations that its builders understood with a mastery we've only recently begun to rediscover. So what are we left with? A civilization that moved mountains without wheels. A people who saw stone not as weight, but as meaning. A calendar carved in the earth. A monument binding landscapes, cultures, and generations together. Stonehenge was never meant to be simple. It was meant to endure, to challenge us, to pull us back across millennia and force us to ask the same questions that haunted its creators. Who were these people? What did they believe? And what are they trying to tell us? Because the truth is this: Stonehenge is still speaking. With every new discovery, with every core drilled, with every fragment matched to a distant hillside, the mystery does not shrink. It deepens. And maybe that was the point all along. A monument that outlives its makers. A puzzle big enough for the future. A story written in stone, waiting for us to finish reading it. Thank you for reading. And remember, some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some are meant to be explored, layer by layer, stone by stone, for generations to come.